Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I moved into that house on a rainy afternoon. The sound of rain falling on the corrugated iron roof as a reminder that every beginning is a little gloomy. The house was hidden in a small alley. The rent was incredibly cheap. The landlord simply said, "You are free to use everything, except for one room at the end of the second floor hallway. It is always locked." I smiled awkwardly, thinking it was probably just a storage room for old things. But that old, rusty lock kept appearing in my mind like a challenge. On the first day, everything seemed peaceful. I arranged the furniture, rearranged the tables and chairs, and turned on some soft music to drown out the suspicious silence. But as the night went on, I realized that the silence was not comfortable. It was like a void waiting to swallow me, especially in the second floor hallway, where the locked door lay still like a secret that the house was hiding. On the first night, I lay listening to the wind whistling through the cracks in the window. A moment later, from somewhere came a rattling sound, as if someone was trying to insert a key into the lock. I sat up with a start, my heart pounding. I lived home alone, and it was obvious that no one but me had the key. I mustered up the courage to step out into the hallway, but when I stood in front of that door, everything fell silent. I reassured myself it must be just an illusion. But deep inside me, there was something creepy, as if the house was smiling, waiting for me to fall into a trap. The next day, I curiously asked the neighbors about the house. They just looked at me, shaking their heads. "No one has lived there for more than a few months." An old lady whispered, "That room, haunted." I smiled awkwardly, but that sentence was like a seed planted in my mind, growing by the hour. That night, I brought a book to the sofa, intending to read to forget the haunting thought. But when the clock struck 2 a.m., the house suddenly made a loud noise, like the sound of wood cracking. I looked up, the hallway light flickered, and then went out. In the darkness, I saw a faint light coming from the crack in the door of the other room, as if someone had just walked through with a candle. I stood there, frozen, unable to move, a chill running down my spine. That night, I did not sleep. I just sat there staring at the door until dawn. In the early morning sunlight, it looked normal, covered in dust and locked. But I knew I was not dreaming. I decided to find out. 3 days later, when my curiosity overcame my fear, I took a pair of iron pliers, intending to break the lock. When the pliers touched the metal, the air suddenly became heavy, difficult to breathe, as if someone was standing right behind me. I turned around quickly. No one was there. There was only the soft sound of wind and the musty smell from the stained walls. I gritted my teeth and continued to turn the pliers. A click sounded, the lock disengaged. I took a deep breath, gently pushed the door open. Inside was dark, the smell of mold mixed with something pungent like dried blood. I turned on the flashlight. The light swept through the small room, full of dust and cobwebs. But there was one thing that made me shiver. In the middle of the room was an old wooden chair, on which sat a cracked doll, its glass eyes staring straight at me. At the foot of the chair, red stains were imprinted on the wooden floor, like traces of a buried true story. I stepped back, my heart pounding. At that moment, the door behind me slammed shut, the lock automatically latching. I rushed to the doorknob, pulling frantically, but to no avail. The flashlight in my hand flickered, then went out. In the pitch-black darkness, I heard a soft laugh. I couldn't tell where it came from. The first night in the locked room, I realized I was no longer the only one in this house. To be continued in episode 2. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk in the thick darkness, with the door locked behind me, I tried to keep my breathing steady. The moment the flashlight went out, the room seemed to be swallowed by something deeper than silence. I stood still, my ears straining to hear the slightest sound. Then it came, a slow, scratching sound, like fingernails scratching on wood. I swung the flashlight again, and it flashed for a few seconds. The faint light streaked across the opposite wall. There, long winding scratches, deep into the wood, stacked on top of each other, as if someone had tried to escape. I backed away, hitting the chair where the doll sat. It fell sideways, its glass eyes falling out to one side, rolling across the wooden floor with a dry sound. I bent down to pick it up, but as soon as I touched it, the doll let out a small, distorted, ear-piercing laugh, like an animated horror story coming from a broken speaker. I jerked my hand away, throwing it to a corner. The laughter died down, replaced by a whisper that echoed throughout the room. "You shouldn't have opened this door." I felt weak all over, pressed my ear against the door, and tried to call for help. But it was useless. My voice only bounced back, absorbed by the wall. Then suddenly, from the crack in the wall, a cold wind came out, carrying a strong, fishy smell, like the smell of blood that hadn't been washed for a long time. I inhaled it, my throat tightened, and I coughed. During my coughing fit, I saw a round, wet, dark red stain appear in the middle of the floor, slowly spreading as if something was oozing from underneath. In that chaotic moment, the flashlight suddenly turned on strongly, shining straight into the darkest corner of the room, and I saw it. A small figure huddled in the corner, both hands covering its face, its body trembling. I held my breath. It wasn't a doll, it was a human figure. But in the blink of an eye, it was gone, leaving the wall mottled. I began to wonder, was I still conscious, or had I fallen into some kind of living creepypasta? I turned back to the door, turning the knob repeatedly. Suddenly, the lock popped. The door swung open. I dashed into the hallway like a man being chased, sweat pouring down my forehead, my heart pounding like it was about to burst out of my chest. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, I gasped, looking back at the room. The door was closed, silent, as if it had never been opened. The lock was still intact, glinting under the weak yellow light. I staggered down the stairs, into the living room, and sat down on the sofa. Everything was spinning in my head. I told myself I had to leave immediately, but some part of me, a weird curiosity, still urged. What if someone was in that room? What if it was the terrible secret the homeowner was hiding? The thought made it impossible for me to leave immediately. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, listening to the rain patter on the roof. The rain sound seemed to blend with other sounds, footsteps on the second floor, whispers in a language I didn't understand. All of it echoed until the sun came up. The next morning, I decided to find out more. I met the old lady next door and asked her directly about the locked room. She looked at me, her eyes red, and said slowly, "The previous tenant disappeared in the rain. They only found drops of blood all over the floor. No body, I shivered, my whole body cold. And you know, the old lady continued, her voice trembling. They used to hear children singing in the room, even though it had been locked for years. Don't go back there. But I knew I was stuck. I opened it. I saw something I shouldn't have seen, and the next night, that room would come to me again. To be continued in episode 3. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I thought that escaping the locked room was safe, but everything had only just begun. For the rest of the day, I could not concentrate on anything. The image of the cracked doll, the scratches on the wall, and the huddled figure in the dark corner kept appearing, like a movie on repeat. I tried to reassure myself that it was just a tired hallucination, but deep down, I knew that I had encountered something that did not belong to this world. The next night, when the clock pointed to 3 a.m., I woke up with a start. The sound returned. It was not the sound of rain, not the sound of wind. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and steady, echoing right in the second-floor hallway. I held my breath and listened, each sound seeming to sink me into paralysis. Then the footsteps stopped. In front of my door, there was a deadly silence, and then someone knocked 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. I trembled, not daring to move. My whole body felt frozen. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight to shine towards the door. There was no one, but as soon as the light reached me, I saw a hand imprinted on the wood, cold and wet, as if it had just been touched. I screamed and threw the phone on the bed. When I picked it up, the screen was off, and on the glass there was a trace of a slender finger, covered in dark brown stains. I panicked and walked down to the living room, turning on all the lights. But the bulbs flickered repeatedly, then went out, leaving the house in a dim light. And from the ceiling, a soft, singing voice echoed. A child's voice, humming an unfamiliar lullaby. It echoed as if it came from deep within the walls. I held my head, feeling like I was being pushed into a vivid nightmare. This was no longer just a paranormal story, but the truth I had to face. I rushed outside, but when I opened the main door, there was only endless darkness in front of me. There was no alley, no neighbors, no rain, no wind, only pitch darkness. I backed away, my heart pounding. This house had trapped me, like a trap with no way out. When I returned to the living room, I saw that the sofa had been pulled out of place. There were clear sitting marks on the surface of the sofa, but no one was there. I shivered, sat down on the floor, hugging my knees tightly. In my head, the old woman's whisper echoed again. Don't go back there again. But it was too late. I understood that the thing in the room had gone out, and it was circling me hour by hour. At that moment, the clock chimed 4 times. A cold wind swept across the room, causing the door leading to the second floor to swing open. I looked. In the darkness of the hallway, there was a small figure standing still. It didn't move, just looked at me. I shouted loudly, but the sound was stuck in my throat. When I blinked, the figure disappeared. Only the door on the second floor creaked slightly, as if inviting me. I knew I wouldn't be at peace. If I didn't face it, I would go crazy. I took the candle and the lighter, deciding to go up to the second floor. With each step, the wooden floor under my feet creaked, as if someone was laughing at my weakness. When I stood in front of the locked room, the lock was still intact. But what scared me was that the door was ajar, as if it had never been locked before. I pushed the door open with trembling hands. The flickering candlelight reflected into the dense darkness. Inside, the doll had disappeared. On the wall, the scratches seemed to have been newly carved, still wet, oozing red liquid. And from deep in the corner of the room, a childish voice rang out, "We will play together, forever." I collapsed, feeling like the whole world was spinning. I understood that I had just entered a deadly game from which I could not escape, to be continued in episode 4. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the candle in my hand trembled, its weak light shining on the 4 walls covered with scratches like lines of despair. The cold air from the room blew out, making my skin numb. I took a few more steps, trying to see where the voice came from. On the dusty, wooden floor, there appeared tiny footprints, like those of a child. Those footprints spread out wet streaks, as if they had just stepped out of a dark puddle. I followed them, my palms drenched in sweat. The footprints stopped in front of the wall, and immediately I heard a giggle coming from that very spot. I reached out to touch it, and the entire cold wall shook, then split open into a dark crack. From that crack, a foul stench rushed straight into my nose, making me feel nauseous and suffocated. I stumbled back, the candle almost falling. In the darkness of the crack, a small hand reached out. Skinny, grey skin, long, sharp nails. It scraped against the wooden floor, making a horrible screeching sound. I stood there, my whole body trembling. The hand hesitated and then withdrew, replaced by a pair of bright eyes opening from the darkness, staring straight at me. I choked, feeling like the blood in my veins froze. I screamed, rushed out of the room, and slammed the door shut. But the most terrifying thing was that, even though I had locked it, the childish laughter still echoed throughout the hallway, seeping into every crack in the house. It was like those strange animated horror stories playing from an old, broken radio that never turned off. I hid in the living room, pulled out my suitcase, intending to pack my things and leave that night. But when I opened the suitcase, my clothes were gone. Instead, there were yellowed photos. I picked them up with trembling hands. The photos were of strangers, men, women, children, all taken in this very house, and all gradually disappearing from decade to decade. In the last photo, I was stunned to see myself standing in the locked room. My phone vibrated. The screen was pitch black, showing only one line, "Your turn." I dropped the phone, my heart about to explode. Immediately after, the lights in the room flickered on, then went out, leaving absolute darkness. In the dead silence, I could clearly hear someone running around the house. A ghostly laugh mixed with a whisper close to my ear, "Don't hide anymore." I sat down on the floor, holding my head, feeling my consciousness being gnawed at. I wondered if I was dreaming, but every detail, the smell, the sound, the cold was terrifyingly real. This was no longer a nightmare. This was a trap set. And I was the prey. At that moment, the window opened, and a cold wind rushed in, blowing the photo paper. One flew into the air and stuck to my face. When I took it down, I was stunned. It was a picture of me sitting right in this living room, in the same position, with the same panicked eyes. But in the picture, behind me was a smiling child. I turned around, but there was no one. There was only my own shadow on the wall, distorted, abnormally long. The shadow slowly raised its head, moved differently than I did, then raised its hand to wave. I was cold all over and collapsed to the floor. I knew I had awakened something that should never have woken up. Continued in episode 5. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I no longer know how long that night lasted. The photos were still scattered all over the floor. Some were still stuck to the wall, clearly showing the faces of people who had disappeared. Every time I touched them, the coldness from the photos went straight into my hands, causing the blood to stop flowing. I tried to close my eyes, hoping to wake up and see that it was all just a nightmare. But no, every time I opened my eyes, the darkness in the house became thicker, and the whispers became clearer. I could no longer stay in the living room. I decided to leave the house through the back door. When I pushed open the old door, I thought I would see the familiar exit to the small garden. But no, in front of me was a dark forest. The wind whistled through the trees, carrying a musty, pungent smell. I was shocked. This was not the garden I had seen during the day. I stumbled in, my shoes sinking deep into the wet soil. Dry branches snapped underfoot, and the wind made a sound like hundreds of twisted laughter. It felt like I had just entered a cursed campsite, where lost people would never find their way out. In the distance, I saw a flickering light like a campfire. Desperate, I ran towards it. Sure enough, there was a circle of fire burning, surrounded by backpacks, tattered tents, and dented pots and pans. But there was no one. There were only Trace's children's shoes, a rain-soaked notebook, and a doll with half its face burned. I shook and opened the notebook. In a hasty scrawl, I wrote, "We couldn't escape. The room followed us out. If anyone reads this, pray for your soul." I threw the notebook away and ran out of the circle of fire. But just then, the fire went out, leaving behind a pitch-black darkness. From within the forest, glowing red eyes gradually appeared, pairs. They approached, accompanied by small, rustling footsteps, in unison like a choir of invisible children. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and then stumbled. When I raised my head, I saw them, short figures, hair covering their faces, clothes torn, skin ashen dot. They stood in a circle around me, not saying a word. Then, in unison, they began to sing, a dark, eerie lullaby, humming endlessly. The song echoed throughout the forest, paralyzing my whole body. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I screamed, but the sound disappeared in my throat. One of them stepped closer, raised his cold hand, and touched my cheek. Immediately, images exploded in my mind, each person disappearing into the house, dragged into the darkness, never to escape. I woke up to find myself on the living room floor again. I was drenched in sweat, my chest heaving as if I had just escaped a nightmare. But I was still clutching the sodden notebook in my hand. The notebook in the forest. I realized the terrible truth. I had not been dreaming. The house was not only haunted. It had also drawn me into another world where the unfortunate were trapped forever. On the cover of the notebook, the words faded. "Tomorrow night, it's your turn." To be continued in episode 6. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I sat motionless. my eyes glued to the wet notebook in my hand. The words did not disappear. They seemed to be engraved in my mind, repeating a curse. "Tomorrow night, it's your turn." I threw the notebook down hard, but it immediately reappeared on the table in front of me. I shuddered, knowing that I could not throw it away. The darkness in the house thickened, so heavy that I felt like every breath was dragging along the souls lurking in the air. I turned on all the lights, but the weak light could not dispel the gloom. Each light flickered one by one, as if an invisible hand was choking the electricity. I realized that this house did not just want to scare me, it wanted to swallow me. As the clock struck midnight, the wind howled, causing the windows to burst open. Outside, the rain poured down heavily, the rain sounds mingling with the thunder like a mournful orchestra. I ran to close the door, but at that moment, in the rain, I clearly saw the silhouette of a child standing motionless under the tree, looking straight at me. Wet hair, torn clothes, and black eyes. It did not blink. I pulled the curtains closed in panic, but a knock came right after that. 3 slow, haunting knocks. I did not dare to open it, but in the moment of hesitation, I saw the doorknob slowly turn. The door shook repeatedly, and the sound of a child's laughter drifted through the cracks. I screamed, holding the doorknob tightly from the inside. It stopped, but when I turned around, the mirror hanging on the living room wall reflected a scene that broke my heart. In the mirror, the door was wide open, and the child was standing right behind me. I turned around, but saw nothing. The mirror reflected an empty room. I trembled, holding my head. At that moment, the notebook on the table opened by itself. The page flipped quickly, stopping at a new line. "Don't try to run. The house is your grave." I collapsed into the chair, my whole body feeling drained of strength. But then, footsteps came from the second floor. Slowly, step by step, as if someone was deliberately letting me know it was coming down here. I held my breath, my eyes glued to the stairs. A small black shadow slowly appeared, stretching out on the wall thanks to the lightning outside the window. I wanted to run, but my legs were stiff, unable to move. When the shadow reached the bottom step, I clearly heard a child's voice whisper, "Stay here, play with us." I almost fainted, but instead of appearing before me, the figure disappeared as soon as I blinked. There was only the quiet room, the sound of rain and thunder reverberating against the walls. I looked up, looked around, and found that all the pictures on the wall had changed. There were no more unfamiliar faces. They were all pictures of me, in different poses, with different expressions of fear. One of them made me freeze. I was lying motionless on the floor, eyes wide open, blood all over the floor. I screamed, tearing the picture down, but only causing a series of others to fall, covering the room. Each one depicted a different death of mine, hanging, buried in the woods, locked in a dark room. I was stunned, realizing that this house had written my fate long ago, and when I looked up at the ceiling, I saw the words in blood, "No one left." I knew that tonight was just the beginning. What awaited me ahead was much more terrifying. To be continued in episode 7. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I don't remember how long I sat motionless in the darkness. The sound of the rain outside was still pounding on the corrugated iron roof, mixed with the howling wind, sounding like a gloomy chorus. But what made me panic the most was the strange change in the house. The walls, which were patchy and old, now began to crack. Pieces of plaster fell off, revealing layers of rotten wood inside. From the cracks, a thick black liquid oozed out, flowing and wriggling like living snakes. I turned on the flashlight to look, and was stunned to see those black streaks forming letters. Not regular letters, but like characters hastily carved in blood. No one escapes. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. Just then, the sound of children's footsteps rang out again. This time, not on the second floor, but right behind me. I turned around quickly. The flashlight swept across, shining straight into the empty space. But in that split second, I saw clearly a small figure standing close to the wall, hands clenched, face pressed against the crack. When the light touched it, it turned its head sharply. A blank face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a pale white surface. I dropped the flashlight, screaming loudly. When I bent down to pick it up, there was no one there. I ran up to the second floor, because in my subconscious, I thought that only the locked room could explain everything. But when I reached the hallway, I stopped. The old wooden door had disappeared. Instead, there was a smooth wall, as if there had never been a room. I slammed it hard, screaming until my voice was hoarse. The echo echoed back, cold, unresponsive. In a panic, I fell to my knees. My hand touched something hard. I picked it up. It was an old, rusty lock. But the terrible thing was, on its surface was engraved my name. I threw it hard on the floor, but it immediately rolled towards me. As if controlled by an invisible hand, suddenly, all the lights in the house turned on at the same time. The living room, the hallway, the kitchen, all the lights were bright. But instead of feeling safe, I felt a chill, because in each room there was a shadow standing silently. Thin figures, dressed in old clothes, heads bowed, motionless. I closed my eyes, hoping that when I opened them, they would disappear. But when I opened them, they were all there, and gradually, one by one, they raised their heads. Their faces were empty, their eye sockets black. They said nothing, just pointed at me in unison. At that moment, a whisper echoed, "Stay here forever, or die." I trembled, knowing that I had been drawn deeper into the house's terrible game. This was no longer a story about home alone, but a demonic court where my fate had been decided. I screamed, smashing the nearest lamp. The house shook violently, as if in anger at my resistance. Pictures fell, locks rusted red hot. Smoke rose from the floor. From the smoke, a child's face emerged, smiling eerily, then whispered, "Tonight is just a test. Next night is the truth." My heart was pounding, my breath was rapid. I knew this nightmare was only beginning, and I was getting closer to my own end. Continued in episode 8. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the house was no longer a shelter, but a giant trap that was closing in around me. The faceless figures disappeared in the blink of an eye, but I knew they had never left. I crouched down, my hands trembling as I searched for my phone. The screen was cracked but still lit, and a video appeared on it. I pressed it with trembling hands. In the video, I saw myself sleeping on the sofa, mouth agape, dim light shining on my tired face. But the terrible thing was that behind me, in the darkness, dozens of bright eyes were watching. I gasped, realizing that the video was not recorded before. but was being broadcast live right now. I turned around, but there was nothing behind me. I began to lose the line between reality and fantasy. The phone suddenly went dead. The children's voices rang out again. "We're here." I was stunned, holding my head. Then from the ceiling, drops of black water dripped down. I looked up. It wasn't water. It was blood dripping in streams, suffocatingly pungent. The drops of blood spread to the floor, forming a circle. In that circle, the cracked doll reappeared, this time no longer motionless. It raised its head, its glass eyes flashing, its mouth moving in a smile. I jumped up, rushed towards the main door, banging hard for help. But the door opened, and I was stunned. Outside was no longer the familiar alley. In front of me was a vast cemetery, broken tombstones, overgrown with weeds. Smoke was thick. The wind whistled through each tombstone, making groaning sounds. I staggered out, my heart pounding. On the nearest tombstone, I clearly saw my name engraved. I collapsed, my heart about to burst. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet cracked. Grey arms reached up, grabbed my legs, and pulled me down. I struggled, screamed, until my voice was hoarse. But to no avail. Pale faces, without eyes or noses, surrounded me, whispering, "You belong here." In a moment of despair, I suddenly woke up. I found myself in the living room again, sitting among the scattered photos. But before I could feel relief, I noticed a horrifying detail. All the photos had changed. They were no longer pictures of me dead, but of me being buried alive in the cemetery. Each photo depicted the same moment, from a different angle, as if hundreds of eyes had witnessed and recorded it. I screamed, scratched frantically, tore each photo to pieces. But the more I tore, the more new photos appeared, covering the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling. Among the countless photos, one stood out and fell right in front of me. I saw myself sitting down, writing down everything that was happening. And in the corner of the photo was a bold line: "Your episode 8 is over." I choked, my whole body cold. The house didn't just haunt me, it controlled the story. And I realized that I was just a puppet in this terrifying script. To be continued. In episode 9. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. I sat in the middle of the room, my chest heaving as if it were about to burst. The pictures covered the walls, the ceiling, the floor, all of me, on the verge of death. The more I looked, the more creepy I felt, because each picture moved slightly, like a short film playing on endless loop. In one, I was buried alive. In another, I was hanged. In another, my eyes had been gouged out. I tried to close my eyes, but the images kept playing in my head, so clear and detailed that they seemed to be happening right now. My phone rang again. I picked it up, and the screen read, "You are not alone." My heart sank, and I quickly turned on the light. And sure enough, I was not alone. In each picture, the darkness behind me began to thicken, coalescing into shapes. They gathered into small figures, long hair covering their faces, ragged clothes, empty eyes. One by one, the shadows left the photo and stepped into the real world. They surrounded me, dozens of them, moving slowly, their footsteps rustling on the floor like dry bones rubbing against each other. I retreated into the corner, my hand clutching. the phone as my last weapon, but they didn't attack. They just stood there, raising their hands in unison, pointing straight at me. Then a voice rang out from all their mouths at once, like an echo of hell. "You must pay." I trembled and shouted, "What have I done?" But they didn't answer, just stepped closer. Each cold breath blew on my face, making me shiver. I tried to crawl towards the main door, but when I opened it, there was no more cemetery, no more familiar alley. Before me was a large, dark room, lit only by red candles. I was pulled inside. In the middle of the room was a giant wooden table, stacked with countless notebooks, exactly like the one I had. I realized with a start, each book was the story of someone who had been trapped in this house, and all of them disappeared. I approached, trembling, and opening one of them. The trembling lines appeared. We tried to resist. But this room is not just for holding, it is a gate. Once opened, it will never close. I shivered, dropping the book. The whole room echoed with a ghostly laughter, mixed with the whistling wind that sounded like souls crying. Suddenly, the wooden table shook. The books flew away. All the pages opened at the same time, writing my name over and over again. Thousands of times, I fell to my knees, screaming, but in vain. Darkness poured down, surrounding me. The shadows of children rushed forward, grabbing my hands and feet, dragging me into the circle in the middle of the room. They sang a creepy lullaby, in unison, echoing like a curse. Just when I thought I was about to be swallowed up, the room transformed again. I found myself back in the living room, the dim yellow light shining, but everything was different. On the table, the notebook was open to a new page, and on it were the words in bright red blood. "Tomorrow night will be the verdict." I sat silently, knowing that the end was near, and I had no choice but to wait. To be continued in episode 10. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I lost count of how many nights I had spent in this house. Time seemed to be distorted, moving slowly, but it made my mind tired as if I had lived for a century. Every time I thought I had reached the bottom of my fear, the house opened up another level of hell. And tonight, it showed me the most terrible thing. As the clock struck 3, the living room suddenly fell into complete darkness. There was no more rain, no more wind, only a heavy, suffocating silence. Then from the darkness, a candle burned, brightly placed in the middle of the table. I trembled as I approached, but the flickering flame did not give off warmth, but only a coldness as from the grave. Around me, figures appeared again, but this time, they did not stand still. They sat in a circle round the table, heads bowed, as if attending a ritual. A whisper echoed from all around. "The trial begins." I backed away, my whole body trembling. I realized I was being dragged into a ritual, a trial of the souls of the unjustly dead in this house. One of the figures slowly raised his head. His face was torn, his eyes were empty, but his voice was clear. "You opened the door. You freed us, but that also means you will replace one of us." I opened my mouth, trying to explain, but my throat was choked. No sound came out. Suddenly, everyone reached out their hands toward me. For a split second, I saw myself sitting in the middle of the circle, one of them with a blank face. I screamed, rushing toward the door. But when I opened it, I was no longer in the house. Before me was an endless hallway with closed doors on both sides. I trembled as I walked through. Each door echoed with knocks, scratching, and screams. I stopped in front of a door that was shaking violently. From inside, a familiar voice rang out. It was mine. "Help me. Don't open it." I backed away in panic, my heart pounding. But the door swung open, and I saw another version of myself being tied up, dragged into the darkness. Before the door slammed shut, he looked at me, his eyes filled with despair. I ran, but the hallway had no end. Finally, I fell to my knees, sobbing. Just then, another door opened in front of me. I was sucked in, falling into a dark room. And I realized this place was the locked room. But this time, it was completely different. There was no dust or cobwebs. The room was filled with mirrors, reflecting countless versions of me, all distorted, bloody, screaming. I held my head, frantic. Each mirror spoke, whispering in unison. "You have no way out. There is only one outcome." From one of the mirrors, a hand reached out, pulling me closer. I screamed, feeling my body being sucked in. But at that moment, I woke up, finding myself in the living room again, drenched in sweat. On the table, the candle had gone out. Only a thin smoke rose, a pungent smell, and next to me, the notebook was open, with another line written, "Tomorrow, your soul will no longer belong to you." I collapsed, knowing that the final night was approaching. Continued in episode 11. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the last night. I felt it as soon as the sun set. There was no wind, no rain. The air was so quiet that even my heartbeat seemed to echo throughout the house. Each wall cracked more, and from the cracks poured thick black smoke, swirling in the air, seeping into my lungs, making me suffocate. I stopped trying to run. It was clear that this house did not allow escape. I had only one choice: to face it. I walked up to the second floor, where the door that had been locked now appeared, glowing with a cold light. The rusty lock was gone, replaced by a line carved straight into the wood. "You are the key." The door opened without my touching it. Inside, the room was no longer small. It had turned into an endless space, where darkness swallowed everything. On the ground, countless figures knelt, screaming, their hands reaching up as if begging to be freed from invisible chains. When I entered, everything fell silent. Hundreds of empty eyes turned toward me. From the deep darkness, a giant figure gradually emerged. It was the creature that had created all these games. Its shape was unclear, part child, part giant corpse, wrapped in a shroud. Its face kept changing. Sometimes it was those of the neighbors. Sometimes it was my own face, distorted and torn. It leaned down close to me, its voice echoing through the space. "You opened the door. Now you must replace it." I trembled, screaming, "I don't belong here." But the surrounding mirrors immediately appeared, reflecting a series of scenes I had experienced: dolls, graveyards, endless corridors, notebooks, and my countless deaths. In each mirror, I died, then came back to life to continue the nightmare. I realized that I was trapped in an endless loop, and the house was just choosing the moment to keep me forever. The figures kneeling on the ground shouted in unison, "Stay, stay." The shouts were so loud, they shook the space. The giant creature stretched out its hand, a long black hand, and grabbed me. I tried to struggle, but the suction was too strong. At the last moment, I picked up the notebook. The page opened by itself, showing the words, "If you rewrite the story, you can escape, but your soul will be forever cursed." I gritted my teeth, took blood from my hand, and wrote on the page, "The locked room has chosen a replacement. Listen to this story and never repeat my mistake." As soon as I finished writing, the darkness shattered. I collapsed, taking my first breath of the dawn light. I was sitting in front of the house, suitcase beside me. The sky was clear and cloudless. Neighbors walked by, waving as if nothing had happened. The house stood still, quiet, the locked room completely gone. But when I opened the suitcase, the notebook was still there, soaked in blood. On the cover, new words appeared. "This story is not finished. It's your turn to read it." I was stunned, my whole body cold, because I knew one thing for sure. Whoever heard this story had opened that door once more.